Okay, everybody, the time is now 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday, December 11th, 2024, and this meeting is now called to order. If
Please stand and join me in the Pledge of
you
Allegiance.
could follow Commissioner Scheffler in the pledge, please. Thank you very much. Can we please have a roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Rose is absent. Commissioner Austin?
Here.
Brown?
Here.
Scheffler?
Here.
Sheaf?
Here.
Vashani?
Here.
Chair Stahura?
Here. Thank you very much. All right, the next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the regular meeting held on November 13th of this year. If there are no corrections, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we'll take a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, with that, the motion is approved. Moving right along, now is the public input portion of this meeting. So at this time, citizens who wish to discuss any items not on the agenda may speak to the commission. And I will ask, does anyone wish to speak? All right, seeing none, we can close the public input portion of the meeting. And we will move right along to public hearings. We have one public hearing item on the agenda today. First up is PH1, which is a proposed ordinance number 2025-01 and Associated Planning Commission Resolution number 2024-0008 from the City of Monrovia. This ordinance recommends amendments to the zoning portion of the Monrovia Municipal Code to bring it in line with California state law. And Senior Planner Jennifer Driver, I believe this is your first staff report presented to the commission. Welcome and take it away.
Okay, before we turn it over to Ms. Jennifer Driver, I was just going to do a little bit of an introduction. So just as way of background, I think many of the commissioners know that the cities had standards in our municipal code for the regulation of ADUs dating back to the 1990s. And then in the recent years, beginning in 2017 and then in 2020, and now currently state law has actually changed to increase both development potential and capacity and to streamline the review process across the state of California. Tonight's ordinance proposes to take the city's existing ordinance and bring it into compliance with several state laws relating to the regulation of ADUs. I won't name them all. There have been a lot, and for the most part, this purpose of this ordinance is to bring us again into compliance. So next slide. Real briefly, just so everyone knows what is an ADU, they come in all shapes and sizes and configurations that can be placed on a lot. They can be created through the conversion of existing space as new construction. They can be attached. Next slide. A JADU is a smaller type of ADU. These are only permitted on single-family developed lots, and they are created through the conversion of existing single-family homes or an attached single-family garage to a home. And they are a little bit different than an ADU. They don't have to have a full kitchen. They can share a bathroom with the attached primary dwelling, but they have to have at least an efficiency kitchen and a place to sleep. Next slide. And so there are several benefits of ADUs, which is why the state has, over the last years, tightened up their standards to make this an affordable housing type. They provide a source of incomes to homeowners. They allow extended families to be close to each other. They're a great housing type for someone who has an elderly family member living with them, or a college student, or a special needs individual. They provide just as much living space as a newly built condominium or apartment, and they do give homeowners the flexibility to share their homes or their properties with other family members without having to have them in your home. It's a benefit. And so where are ADUs allowed? In the 1990s, they were only allowed on single-family properties. There was minimum lot size requirements. There were standards that regulated open space. All that has been eliminated through state law. Now they're allowed not just in single-family, but in multifamily and in mixed-use zones, where there's any type of project that has both a residential and non-residential component. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Jennifer Driver, who's going to give us an update on the key changes that are implemented in the proposed ordinance this evening.
So, good evening, Commissioners. Nice to see you all. So the proposed ordinance is really to ensure that the Monrovia's regulations for ADUs and JADUs is aligned with the state's new legislation and to increase the potential for development throughout the city. The ordinance establishes both state minimum standards for ADUs and also creates some local restrictions for projects that want to deviate from the state minimum standards. The proposed ordinance in general changes the number and type of ADUs that are allowed to be developed in conjunction with a single-family and multifamily developed property. It also changes and allows for more deviations in height. It also creates new development standards to target or to kind of be more Monrovia-centric with objective design standards. And then the last part of the ordinance is to streamline the process and to reduce the number of steps that an applicant has to go through in order to gain approval. So the crux of the ordinance and the change in state law is based around the idea that all ADUs and JADUs are by right and ministerial and only require approval of a building permit. Through this ordinance, the city took advantage of this opportunity to revamp the existing two-pronged process, which we currently call as the building permit only process and the planning division review process, and has rebranded them as two sets of standards that clearly state which types of ADUs are aligned with the state minimum standards, and then those that want to deviate slightly, and those would have to follow their alternative local standards. And this just is geared towards producing the ADUs that want to follow the state streamlined standards would be more, they'll be the smaller, the quicker, the easier to develop ADUs that are converted out of existing space and are smaller. And as stated before, when they're using the local standards, they can be a little bit larger, but then they would also have to follow additional standards that Monrovia has created as part of this ordinance. So, let's talk about what you can do on a lot developed with a single-family dwelling. Under current standards, through both the building permit only process and the planning division review process, you're only allowed to have one ADU and one JADU. The ADU would either be converted or new construction. Under the new ordinance, with the state streamlined standards, the number of ADUs has increased. You're allowed to have two ADUs, one from a converted area within the house or a detached structure, and then also one is a newly constructed detached structure, as well as the JADU within the single-family home. Using the alternative local standards, you would be allowed to have one ADU and one JADU, but the ADU could be larger than what would be allowed through the state streamlined standards. So just to visualize what this could look like, using the streamlined permit standards with the opportunity to have three different types of ADUs. As stated, you could have the ADU as part of the existing house, or you could have it detached as a converted garage, and then the JADU would be part of the house itself, and then you would be allowed to construct a new detached ADU in both scenarios. So in both scenarios, you're allowed to have four types of living units on the property using the state streamlined permit standards. So let's talk about multifamily properties. Currently, the state and the city allow for universal number of 2 detached ADUs and a minimum of 1 ADU or up to 25% of the number of existing units converted within the building, regardless if you're following the building permit only process or the planning division review process. Under new regulations, the city has eliminated the option for the local standards and is simply following the state's regulations regarding multifamily developed properties. And the number of ADUs is based on whether the property is currently developed with a multifamily building or if it is proposed to be developed. And so if it's already developed with a multifamily building, you can have up to 8 detached ADUs. But keep in mind that that number cannot exceed the number of existing units already on the property. And they would also then be allowed the current rate of conversion of an existing non-livable space into ADUs. Properties that are not developed, that are vacant currently, and are proposed to be developed with a multifamily dwelling, regardless of the number of units proposed, only 2 detached ADUs are permitted. And again, the same allowed conversion of non-livable space is permitted. And so, again, to visualize what this could look like, you can see on the left is a potential for an existing development. You would have the 8 detached ADUs, and then also this is for a scenario with 16 units. So this is the most developed outside of the existing footprint that could happen. And then on the right is showing how a proposed development would only have the 2 detached ADUs. It's also important to note that properties, Monrovia's, the potential for development of the 8 detached ADUs is limited typically to properties that are zoned RH, or the high residential, and that's mainly around the metro station or along Doherty Road. So it's not, most of the city is not going to see this type of development. But this is required by the state legislation to incorporate into our guidelines and restrictions, so we have included it in our proposed ordinance. One of the other big changes in the proposed ordinance and in state regulations is to allow more flexibility in height for newly constructed ADUs. For both ADUs developed on single-family properties and multifamily properties, if you're within 1/2 mile walking distance of a high-quality transit corridor or a major transit stop, you would be allowed 18 feet or up to 20 feet if you have a pitched roof to align with the primary dwelling's pitched roof. If you are constructing a new ADU attached to the single-family structure, you can go up to 25 feet or to the height limitation of the zoning district, whichever is lower, but no more than 2 stories. And then for multifamily developed properties, if the existing or if the proposed multifamily structure is multi-story, then you can go up to 18 feet, regardless if you're within that 1/2 mile walking distance of that qualified station or corridor. So the state does identify and require certain standards or regulations to be applied to all types of ADUs that we have included in the proposed ordinance. The first is that the city can't deny an application based on existing non-conforming zoning conditions, building code violations, and unpermitted structures, except for in the cases of life and safety purposes. The state no longer permits cities to require a covenant for ADUs. So the city currently has a covenant requirement that would restrict the sale of ADUs as well as restrict the owners from renting them as short-term rentals. That is no longer part of the requirements for all ADUs moving forward. But JADUs can still have a covenant, or still are required to have a covenant to maintain that they are owner occupied and to kind of support that they're part of a single-family house and not, yeah, sorry. And then the other requirement, as alluded to in the covenant requirement I just mentioned, we have to now allow the sale of ADUs under certain conditions. If they're developed in such a way or owned in such a way, then we have to allow the sale of that. We also cannot, it's part of the operational standards now, and not as part of the covenant, that ADUs can't be rented as short-term rentals, but JADUs do not have to follow that same restriction. So while the state has created a lot of standards that we have to comply with, we are still able to have some local control over what types of ADUs are developed within the city. And that is when they're being developed under the alternative local standards. So we still want to preserve our historic resources when we can. So ADUs that are proposed that are larger than the 800 or don't comply with the minimum state standards on a property that is designated as a historic resource would still have to follow the city's current regulations for historic resources and go through a certificate of appropriateness and comply with the Mills Act contract. And as I've been mentioning throughout this presentation, there are some new objective design standards that will be applicable to ADUs that are developed under the alternative local standards. And these design standards have been designed to be objective, to be aligned with the state's requirements, and not allow for any subjective opinions or stylistic choices, and so that they can ensure that there's a swift and just review of all the ADUs uniformly. So we have outlined what types of features have to be matching. We have identified that decks and balconies have to be limited when they're next to a property line. We've also restricted HVAC equipment to abide by the same 4-foot side setback and rear setback in the goal of reducing noise impacts on neighboring properties. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. And then, in light of all these new regulations, after publishing the ordinance and the staff report, staff has made some recommended changes that were released and published prior to this meeting. But to kind of reiterate or summarize what we have recommended as changes, we just want to make sure that the proposed ordinance is objective, and that we don't include standards that could be subjective, and will help streamline ADU development in the future. So there's just some technical things that we've outlined, like removing references to multifamily structures when discussing the local standards, because there are no standards for multifamily structures in the local standards. We want to make sure that there's no standards that restrict the front yard setback, because the state legislation doesn't have any restrictions on a front yard setback. And we also want to make sure that even when using the local development standards, that when you're doing an attached ADU, that the limitation is typically the 50% of the primary dwelling size. If for whatever reason that does not equate to 800 square feet, if it's less than 800 square feet, we can't deny an 800 square foot ADU that's attached to the single family house, as long as it meets the applicable the height standards and setback standards. And then just to reiterate and strengthen our historic resource standards for alternative local projects, we wanted to refer back to the objective design standards that we have included in this ADU ordinance. After publishing the report, we did receive one public comment letter from the California Housing Defense Fund. They expressed concerns regarding the objectivity or application of parking requirements on projects or ADUs that utilize the state standards. They also had concerns that we would be restricting development of manufactured ADUs. After consultation, we did make one change to the ordinance to accommodate the parking clarification and explicitly state that all ADUs that are developed using the state streamlined standards are not subject to the parking requirements. We did consider the comment regarding the manufactured ADUs, and as we gathered that the state and the federal regulations, the commenter may not have all the information available that needs to be correct. So with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the modifications to the ordinance and adopt the resolution 2024-008, recommending approval of the ordinance to City Council and finding that the ordinance is exempt from CEQA. And then just as a FYI for the future, we will be, once this has been adopted by City Council, we will be transferring it for review and approval to HCD, which may have corrections or comments that we may have to bring back to the Planning Commission and City Council for further review and approval. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to John.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Good evening. Thank you, Jennifer. Just wanted to briefly explain how we're working towards implementation of State Law AB 1232. This requires cities to provide pre-approved accessory dwelling unit plans to the public. Building an ADU for a homeowner is a really new adventure, and there's so many options to consider, and a lot of time goes into designing one of these things. This law is really meant to help take the guesswork out of that process and to select a set of plans that have already sailed through the city's permitting process. So the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments knows that the cities need to comply with this law by January 1st, 2025, and worked with an architectural firm to create a series of ADU prototype plans for cities to consider. So Monrovia has selected just 5 at this time. We can always add more in the future, but in order to comply with this law by January 1st, we selected 5 of the most very Monrovia core designs that we can find, and had those plans all completely vetted by all of our departments, Public Works, Building Division, Planning Division. And we've provided corrections on those, and the architectural firms are working on those corrections and are going to have those plans made available at the beginning of the year. And homeowners will be able to select one of those 5 sets of plans. They come in 1 and 2 bedroom sizes. They're up to 800 square feet. And they will select the conceptual plans they want and go to the architect directly and pay for those plans and have them submitted to the city. The only minor corrections that the homeowner will need the architect to make is that they fit on the property. You can't just plop one of these things down on a property. You have to take into account the grading and some various site features. So the architects will have to do a little bit of work on that end. But the permitting process will save the homeowner a lot of time. It's expected to be reviewed in about 2 weeks if everything is perfect on the site. Everything, that's assuming, whereas it would normally take 6 to 8 weeks because there's a lot of back and forth between the contractor, the architect and the city. So this really is meant to help homeowners who may be discouraged by the process or not want to do it, be able to select from a set of plans that they're pretty much guaranteed to get through the city's permitting process. So just wanted to provide an update to the commission on that. And these are the prototype plans that will be available to the public. They will be on our website. And like I said, we're starting out with 5 at this time, but there could be more. But we wanted to make sure that we had all of our comments on these 5 at least. With that, this concludes our presentation.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Driver, and Ms. Bermejo. So moving right along, do we have questions from the commission? Commissioner
I do,
Austin?
yeah. Thank you on the good presentation, and one for Jennifer and one for John, and more of a informational from John's side. On Jennifer, you said that the state doesn't have any requirement on setbacks, and I saw that in the table on the handout we got this evening, updated. So does that mean if someone wanted to build an ADU on their property, they could put it at the sidewalk, since there's no standard? Or does our rules apply, in, let's say, 25 feet?
The state does not make any limits or requirements for a front yard setback. So the city can't impose any local standards on a front yard setback. So if the front yard is where an ADU can be, unfortunately, that is where the ADU
So
is
we could
allowed to be.
potentially see something up to like where the city would have the eminent or the easement for like a sidewalk, if the property allowed that. Do we envision something like that on larger properties?
The city, to this point, has never had a homeowner, actually, we've had a few, in cases where this actually happens in real life scenarios, is when you have a lot that's already developed with a single-family home at the rear of the property, and there's nowhere else to put your ADU. So I think we've had it like a handful over
And
the
they
last
have 50-yard front yard where they could.
Right, but there are other standards that kind of interplay on placement of where the ADU will have to be to meet health and safety standards, site visibility standards, if there's a driveway next to it.
Okay. Well, thank you for the clarification. And for John, the informational thing regarding the prepackaged ADUs, does that help the homeowner with cost because it is streamlined, and when they go to the architect, it becomes more reasonable for them or incentivize them?
It does. It saves a significant amount of time and money. In terms of permitting costs, the city covered the cost of reviewing all these plans with all the different departments, so it does save them quite a bit of money.
So it should be a motivating factor.
It should be, and take out the guesswork.
Thank you.
Commissioner Scheffler, I think? Oh, Sheaf.
Curious to know whether or not parking restrictions are associated with this and how it's going to work.
I can, if you like, I don't mind taking that. So with the state ADU standards, state law basically limits in potential scenarios where a parking space is required. When you go through all the exemptions, there's a total of 10 that have been built into the ordinance. We end up where a parking standard is only needed on the greater than 800 square foot ADU that's not within a half mile of a transit stop. It's not demolishing a garage. There's a lot of scenarios. The reality of is the state's telling us, cities, we can't put in a costly parking requirement for the production of ADUs. That's the message.
Park wherever you want.
I'm sorry to interrupt. When they say transportation corridor, can you define what that is? Is Huntington Drive a transportation corridor? Because I know what the metro, our Monrovia station is, but is Foothill, or is that kind of the thought process there?
For when you're considering parking requirements, any bus station allows you to not have the parking requirement. So when you're talking about the height standards, that allows you the additional height. That's when you're talking about the major transit stop in the high quality corridor. That's the metro station. But for parking, it's any local bus station would qualify to exempt you from parking requirements.
Commissioner Scheffler?
I don't know who to direct this out. I got a couple things. First and foremost, you mentioned splitting up ADU on a parcel and selling it. Okay? What happens when you have a common utility, which is very common? Well, how do you split that up? I know it's not a you thing, it's a state thing, but if you're going to sell a property if you're going to split up a property using common utilities, and I've done 2 of them personally, how do you do that? Is there any accommodations? How do you how do you split up a water bill and a gas bill?
We haven't studied this potential for how this happens. We haven't received any development plan proposing it. The ability to actually get to a point where you can separate your ADU and sell it is very complex. And it involves a lot of different requirements of a developer to even pull something like this off.
Because they are built with common utilities. In other words, they have their own
Correct.
utilities. Second question, you mentioned a 4-foot setback, and that includes the HVAC. Remember saying that?
Yeah.
Where do you put them, being that they cannot be roof mounted, and they can't be in the front of the project or the building, the ADU, whatever you want to call it? Where would you put your HVAC at?
So that HVAC standard that I mentioned is applicable to those that are developed outside of the state required or state minimum ADUs.
So if you're maintaining a 4-foot setback, rear yard setback and side yard setback, and you're not allowed to put them in the front and you can't roof mount them, where would you put them pertaining to the state's requirements?
There are scenarios that you can roof mount them.
I think for that standard, Commissioner Scheffler, the majority of the ADU proposals that we see are built under the streamlined permit standards. When a property owner wants to come in and develop a brand-new ADU that exceeds the 800 square foot size, the standards basically will dictate to the homeowner or developer, you'll need to create space to put your HVAC. So they'll have to modify the design. This standard applies predominantly to structures that are being built from the ground up. So that will all have to be contemplated and built into the site plan.
Okay. JDUs, they used to have, they were mandated that you had to own or occupy them. Is that still in place?
That is correct.
They're still in place.
Correct.
As far as the plans, Commissioner Scott touched on them. As far as the purchase price, does anybody know?
Unfortunately, with these pre-approved plans, the city's responsibility is to provide the concept on the plan and then have the resident, they go directly to the architectural firm. Through the San Gabriel Valley COG and staff, we have no control on the end cost that happens through the transaction between the homeowner and the architect.
The homeowner is still responsible, so the win is simply that the plans have already been pre-approved through the city of Monrovia, so there's no going back and forth for corrections, per se. Is that going to be the win as far as?
The idea is that the development review process is minimized. The corrections, if there are, should be very minimal. What is plan checked is everything from the floor plans, the structural, the elevations, the footings. There are options for footings on each of the plans. The development review process through the building permit review will be to where's this going to sit on the site? So the majority of the plan check is on the site plan and then the utilities, how it will be connected for utilities.
Okay,
The assurity to the homeowner is that because we've plan checked the majority of the plan already, when the plan comes into the building division, it's already going to have approval stamps on those portions of the plan that have been pre-plan checked.
So the cost going forward, in other words, I have a basic idea what it would cost to have an ADU drawn through an architect. Just a ballpark, I have a basic idea. There's no concept as far as the homeowner's still going to pay for the
Correct.
plans in full. And going forward, they don't know at this point where they're at. They're going to have to deal with an architect. That's already a,
So the
approve
plans
these?
that are, correct, the plans that are going on, that would go on the city's website will have the architectural firm's ownership information.
they're naming two. You have two firms that are working on these, is that correct?
Correct. And any architect who's interested in having a plan that is a pre-approved is able to work with the city, the idea is over the course of time, we can build an inventory of several concept plans for people to choose.
No covenant? Is that my understanding?
I'm so sorry.
No covenant required?
No comment.
There's no covenant required for ADUs, but there's still one for a JADU.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brown?
So who owns the plans, the architectural plans?
The architect still has full ownership of the plans. The city's only allowed to post on its website the concept drawing and their contact information.
Okay, and how were they selected?
So the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments worked to reduce the cost to all cities within our area, San Gabriel Valley region. And they worked with 2 different consultants to survey a variety of various architectural types and plans, and architects who've worked already in our San Gabriel Valley. They put the plans together, and then they were provided to cities to select from.
Is there a way to have a set cost for whatever those, I guess it's a little concerning to me that we're telling people, we're making this easy for you, but you have to use these 2 people, and the price could be whatever they determine the price to be. And that seems a bit unfair.
So can clarify a little bit. The pre-approved plans are for, anyone can submit for an ADU, and the design of that ADU, they can hire any architect to provide that plan. The intent of the state law is to remove governmental constraints during the plan check process. And by shortening that plan check process, the city is able to, in turn, reduce the cost to the applicant. There are several homeowners who just don't want to deal with the full development build-out of an ADU. By the state having us put these pre-approved plans, it gives an option to homeowners who just want to do a smaller ADU and get something done and built quickly to use a plan that's already been vetted by the city.
Okay.
So there's no requirement that they have to use these pre-approved
But it
plans.
still discourages people from using their own architects because it's like, if time was, I'm just looking
weeks.
at 2 weeks, you know what I'm, so it's like, okay, well, that time is money, so, I don't know, I would just.
I completely understand, which is why I think over time, the idea is to build the city's inventory of these pre-approved plans to offer more.
Is it true that to be in compliance with the state law, we have to have some of these pre-approved plans
is
available
correct.
for people on January 1?
That is correct.
And has the city been approached by any other builders or architectural firms that are proposing to put plans into the
Not to
city's
my
stock?
knowledge, no.
Huh. Okay. Do you have any more?
I mean, I don't know, I would still like to have some, I mean, I don't know how it works, but, I mean, there should be like a known, like, I don't know how you can cap a cost, or it's not, I mean, I don't know if we can have an agreement with these architects that for these stated plans, it's not gonna exceed X for our homeowners. It's just, I mean, I don't know if that's
Yeah,
possible.
we can
but-
definitely look into that.
So that,
I don't, we can definitely, we'd be happy to look into that.
One more follow-up on the ADU plans. The main features that are pre-approved are the floor plan and footings and things like that. How about like the exterior features and the appearance and the aesthetics of the ADU? Is that
Those-
also pre-approved, or are those more up to the whoever is the owner who's building this?
So in that scenario, the pre-approved concept includes everything from the aesthetic features from the ground up. If a homeowner wanted to deviate and take that idea and modify it, they could work with that architect to make changes.
You had more, Commissioner Scheffler? Or
Well,
Commissioner Rose?
I thought it was my understanding that the ADU needed to kind of match the existing home. So not always will what's being offered match, especially with historic homes.
Yes, so the answer is yes and no. And I can explain. When an ADU is 800 square feet or less, it falls automatically under the state streamlined permit standards, meaning the city has absolutely no design control over those ADUs. The only time we get a little control, is when they exceed any of those thresholds that are outlined. So a ADU that's larger than 1,000 square feet.
So even with historic homes, if they're smaller than
Correct.
800?
Correct, they're by right.
Somebody
They're
could
even
just
more
put
by
a
right
box
than
back
we're-
there that looks terrible?
So what I can say is what staff did with respect to these pre-approved plans and how we selected the designs. The designs that the COG came up with were representative not just of Monrovia, but of the entire San Gabriel Valley. And they had designs that were greater than 800 square feet in size. Our team zeroed in on the architectural styles that we find here in our city. We have minimal traditional, we have a Spanish Mediterranean, craftsman style. We focused in on those architectural styles, and then we zoomed in on the home sizes that were less than 800 square feet. As a preventative measure of, ensuring, in order really to ensure neighborhood compatibility to the maximum that we could within this requirement to allow pre-approved plans on our website.
I don't know where this comment belongs, but the option 2 one strikes me as not necessarily being consistent with a lot of neighborhood compatibility within the city of Monrovia. But it's not necessarily a question.
Chair, I would say we should address that after we take public comment and close the public hearing.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Scheffler.
Thank you. On a location for a HVAC system, I've built a project before, and the guy refused to put the condenser in the backyard. It's in the city of Monrovia. It was allowed to be put in the front yard as long as there was plants parked around it, if you will, planted around it. That was back in COVID, so we're going to call it back in 2000. Today, you wouldn't even know it's there. Okay, it was a very well thought out process where to put it by the city. Okay, so where I'm going on an ADU project, I've already touched on the setbacks that you mentioned. Would it be possible to put a condenser in the front of an ADU? Maybe that's a building directly, you're a senior planner. Maybe that's a building question, if you will.
That would work. The setbacks that are in the proposed ordinance relate to side property line
Correct.
and rear property line. There's no requirement for distance in between structures. So if it's designed to allow for the amount of required space on the building's end to separation from the mechanical equipment, and then it would be allowed.
Because the furnace would be in the attic at that point, yet the condenser would be, you could put it up front and, again, disguised it, if you will.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I-
Commissioner Brown?
Sorry, one more question. So if you were to put one on top of a garage, is it 18? You can't go, it would be higher than, or are you capped? You can't, how does that work?
If you're putting an HVAC unit on
No,
top
no,
of a
not an
garage.
HVAC,
ADU.
ADU, on top of your garage. So your garage, I mean, it's already, I'm thinking of like my garage, it's already pretty tall. And it said there's like an 18-foot.
Correct, correct. So that height limit is measured from the grade. And so essentially, if you couldn't fit an ADU within the total height limit,
Okay.
if you're allotted that 18 feet, then you wouldn't be able to do a two-story ADU.
Unless it's attached, and then you could do
Correct.
25, right?
That is
Attached
correct.
to the main residence.
Under the multifamily standards. Is that- or-
Single
and-
family.
And single family.
Okay, so if it was an attached garage, but not a standalone garage?
Correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Vashani.
For the pre-approved plans, is that applied to the single-family homes or also multifamily?
It could be either.
Okay.
I wanted to clarify back on slide 9, you talked about how the number of ADUs on a lot per single-family lot. How does that translate into our medium-density zoned parcels here in the city, like RM 3000, 3500, et cetera, those ones?
So the type of ADUs or number of ADUs is based off of how the property is currently developed or proposed to be developed. So regardless of the zoning district, we need to look at what the physical development is.
So for instance, if there was a lot that already had 2 dwellings on it, then would it be, if you were building according to the state streamlined standards, would it be up to 3 units per one of those dwelling structures, as long as all of the other constraints were satisfied?
So it's for the lot. So if there's
For
two
the lot, okay.
detached single-family units, then the lot is allowed to have the 3 ADUs.
Okay, the lot. So this just
Yeah.
applies to the lot, not, it doesn't relate to anything about the existing number of units on the lot?
Correct.
For those medium density properties, okay. Commissioner Scheffler.
In our package, there's manufactured homes they're talking about. Okay, that would be allowed to be an ADU. It says there's no state regulations, but the federal government regulates them. And second of all, they talk about it has to have utilities to it. So between the two, I could take a tough shed, just a scenario, take a tough shed, 20 by 20, I'll just throw it out there, 400 square feet, if you will, and put utilities to it. Would that be an acceptable ADU? I'm not trying to be difficult, I'm just,
Yeah, no, there's actually a standard that relates to California Health and Safety Code, Section 18007, that states the requirements that a manufactured home would have to meet in order to be used as an ADU. So just using a tough shed alone is likely not going to meet the building code requirement.
okay, so a manufactured home, it stipulates that it has to have a permanent foundation.
Correct.
Okay? I don't know how permanent a tin steel foundation would be considered, but that would be an acceptable ADU, a manufactured home.
If it meets the building requirements for, yes, yes.
But it said the state didn't have requirements for it, yet the federal government had requirements for a manufactured home.
I'm going to have our city attorney, Assistant City Attorney Chelsea, help me with this question.
Okay, just purely a.
Yeah, so we read the comment letter that was received earlier this afternoon, and we do not think the commenter is correct on this issue. So if you look at the federal law that is cited in the comment letter, that federal law provides that each state has the right to establish standards for stabilizing and support systems of manufactured homes. So therefore, federal law is not the only law that is applicable, but state law could be applicable as well. So we do not think that any changes to the city's proposed ADU ordinance are necessary at this time as a result of the comment letter that was received.
Thank you.
Okay, I can continue with my questions. Let's see. We chose to only apply the state streamlined standards to ADUs built on multifamily lots. Can you just clarify that is lots that already have an existing multifamily attached dwellings developed on that lot?
The multifamily ADU standards would apply to properties that are both existing developed properties and then also ones that are proposed to be developed with a multifamily dwelling structure.
I see.
There's just a different number of allowed detached ADUs depending on if it's developed or not developed.
And what motivated the choice to only apply the state streamlined standards there instead of having a similar breakdown related to square footage?
State law. State
Okay,
law
so
does
that
not,
we
yes.
have to do that.
Correct.
Got it. So it wasn't our choice. It was being in compliance with the state law. Okay. And so these state laws have been in effect for a while, and our municipal code we're just getting it into compliance. Between the time that these other state laws have come into effect and now, have there been any ADUs that were produced that didn't meet what's in our municipal code now, but did comply with the state law?
Yes, we have allowed ADUs with higher heights in compliance with current state regulations. Our current code limits height to 16 feet.
Okay.
So we have allowed ADUs up to 18 feet when they comply with state regulations.
That's a good example of something that we've done. Has there been any other exception made to our existing code in a similar vein, or has it mainly been the height?
Yeah, I think it's primarily been the height. I know with this current ordinance we're proposing where there were some areas in the code that just had a lot of ambiguity as to what applies and what doesn't apply in between the two processes. So I think this ordinance just clarifies it. But I think the biggest, probably with the height, the parking standards have changed over the last year, so we're already implementing those.
Thank you. So there's, do we have any follow-ups on that? Okay. There's also been a lot of state legislation about subdividing lots. And, you could take like a single-family lot, and you could divide it in two, and you could build a single-family home on each one of those, and then you could build 3 ADUs on each of those lots. So, but you mentioned earlier that there are a lot of hurdles to selling an ADU separately. You talk a little bit more about when an ADU could be sold separately? Like, what are the conditions that could lead to that?
Yeah, so state law specifies the conditions under which an ADU can be conveyed separately. As Sherry mentioned earlier, there are very limited situations where an ADU could be conveyed separately. For example, in order for it to be conveyed separately, the ADU or the primary dwelling would have to be built or developed by a qualified nonprofit corporation. So that would significantly limit the number of ADUs that would potentially be able to be conveyed separately from the primary dwelling.
That's a big one. Okay. And have there been other ordinances by other cities that have brought their municipal codes into compliance with current state law that have been approved by HCD already?
So a number of cities have submitted their ADU ordinances for review. And I think there's only one that has gotten it approved by HCD.
Do you know what city, out of curiosity?
I don't recall, but it's now outdated.
Okay.
It was from
As soon as you get it
2021
applied.
or something like that. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Okay. The reason I'm asking it, I'm trying to figure out if Monrovia is kind of on the vanguard here or if we are catching up, and it sounds like it's the former.
That is our goal.
I think you'll find that there are a lot of cities, even in our San Gabriel region, who are implementing a lot of housing laws from our housing elements.
Yeah.
And usually this is the season for ADUs amongst several of our cities in our region. So it's the season to update our ordinances.
Any other questions from folks? Sorry, let me just go through. Can we just kind of zoom out and maybe take a step back here and say, like, what are the key differences between an ADU that could be built today in compliance with Monrovia's municipal code and what could be built after this ordinance goes into effect? Height is one thing. Setbacks are another thing. What are the other kind of major things that are changing here?
One of the major things is the number and the type of ADUs that are now permitted in combination. So it's allowing more flexibility for future ADU development.
Okay. And how about neighborhood compatibility?
So as we've kind of mentioned along the way, we have limited control over that when they're developed using the states or the streamlined permit standards. We only have the ability for neighbor compatibility when they're utilizing the local standards. And that's when the historic preservation regulations come into play and the objective design standards. Those have been crafted to kind of maintain what Monrovia strives to have.
Yeah.
And I could add that I think with respect to our objective design standards in this ordinance, they're a lot stronger in this current ordinance in this ordinance being proposed than they were in the one that's currently on the books.
Okay.
One last
Yeah,
What
Commissioner
type
Brown.
of noticing will be issued to like neighbors when someone's getting ready to do this?
So because it's ministerial and they're by right, there's actually no public noticing. A property owner can come in, they submit their plans, they go through building plan check, they get their permit, and they can build.
And that's by state law for
That's-
both set of standards?
Correct.
You can't require that. And one more question, and this is, I think, kind of tangential, but I was curious. I think in our existing code and also in this new ordinance, ADUs are not allowed to be used for short-term rentals. Why did that? Do you have a historical perspective on why that came about or historical context?
Well, it's a state standard, it's in our current code, and the idea is short-term rentals are primarily used as vacation, Airbnb. The whole goal of the state in making the production of these ADUs to be built quickly is so that they can be homes, affordable homes for folks.
So it is a state law
Yes.
that ADU in particular shall
Yes.
not be used? Okay,
Yes.
got it. Okay, more questions? All right. Everyone brought their question game tonight. Thank you very much. So now we've exhausted the commission's questions. This is the time and place for public input regarding PH1. So we'll accept, testimony from in the following order. The applicant, the City of Monrovia, has already spoken, and then persons in favor and persons with concerns. And then we'll have a chance to respond. So go ahead, please state your name.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Brian Yamaguchi. Good evening, staff, council member, and 3 people watching online. I think before the Commission, some of it you have no choice. The state standards, you're going to have to approve regardless of what you think. The only thing really that you have to consider right now is the alternative local standards for Monrovia. And personally, I think the staff has done a great job of trying to preserve as much as Monrovia as we can into those standards. So I would think that it's, you should approve it. I do share Commissioner Brown's concern about the fact that you have basically a monopoly. There's only one firm that has the Craftsman design. If you want to build a Craftsman, you have to go to that architect if you want to get streamlined. So I would encourage staff to reach out to other architects and get other Craftsman designs so that at least there's some competition. I don't think you can regulate how much they charge, but if there's competition, at least there's market forces that will bring the prices down. And I also share Commissioner Rose's disdain for the state's law that there's no setback in the front of the yard. that's what you get when you elect the people that you elect to Sacramento. So when you vote for people, whoever is listening to this, hold them accountable for some of the things that they're making cities do, because that's ridiculous.
Thank you, Mr. Yamaguchi. I don't see anyone else in the audience, so I'm assuming we have no one else to speak. Do we have any other comments from city staff?
I just want to say, one, staff will definitely reach out to see what we can do about getting as many pre-approved plans on the website and working with a variety of firms and to also get a plethora of styles to choose from. And I also want to say just thank you to our city attorney's office who've really done top-notch work on making sure our goal, is to pass through HCD. But the amount of time that our team has put together, Jennifer, John, Chelsea, Carol Lynch, a name from the past, and another housing attorney has been phenomenal. So I just wanted to recognize them.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So with that, the public testimony portion of the hearing is now closed. So now is the time for the commission to discuss and debate. So, thoughts? Commissioner Ross?
Thoughts? Well, one, thank you for the good presentation. The ultimate goal was to encourage development for, as Sherry said, for long-term housing needs. And I think Monrovia has done a good job. And if we have disdain, it's other communities that aren't doing their job that's making the state enforce these laws upon us. But we all live in it together. I understand where Commissioner Brown was going with that, but I think there might be some economy of scale that might help people. And more of these entrepreneur architects or whatever might make it because they're going to be providing all these cities. There's 20-some cities in the San Gabriel Valley or more that might make it affordable. And it's an option, and we want to provide residents and peoples with tools or tools in the toolbox. They don't have to go that way, but I think they're going to find the economy of scale and things of that nature. And maybe somebody will be, kind enough to do that and say, I'll do it on the scale. But I think that what they've done is good, and we've got to give people tools in the toolbox. There's been some really good articles in the LA Times over the last 6 months about parents saying, hey, I don't want the big front house, but I want to live, I have a big property and I want to see the grandkids and be with the kids, and we can build these ADUs or flip it around, the adult children and things like that. And I think that's a good thing. It gets them out of paying rent at these expensive apartments. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Austin. Other comments? All right. With that, I'll entertain a motion.
Okay.
If we have one.
Move to adopt Planning Commission Resolution Number 2024-008.
Do I have a second?
I'll second. And a friendly amendment to Gary's thing is to include the updated language that was given to us.
All right. So moved. Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Commissioner Austin?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
Rose?
Yes.
Scheffler?
Yes.
Sheaf?
Yes.
Bushani?
Yes.
Chair Stahira?
Yes. All right, that carries. With that, we are done with that rich topic, and the public hearing portion of tonight's meeting is closed. I believe we have no administrative reports, so we can continue to the Community Development Director report portion of tonight's meeting. Go ahead, Director Bermejo.
All right, thank you very much, Chair Stahira. Our team is wrapping up towards the end of the year. We have a lot of projects we're working on. One item that I just wanted to highlight to the commission is the City Council has been still considering the vetting of an inclusionary housing ordinance. There will be a special study session with the council next Tuesday. If you're able to attend. the meeting, it would be helpful because an ordinance, should one move forward, would first come to the Planning Commission for your recommendation. Secondly, the last meeting, we presented the annexation. The commission recommended that to the city council for approval last week. The council approved the general plan and zoning amendments for that. Staff is just now waiting for LAFCO to make their final approval and issue a compliance measure, so that would move forward. In the division of art and public places, we have a lot of art that's being painted around town. If you've driven Huntington Drive, you can see the pedestrian bridge. The Route 66 images are now moving across Huntington Drive. The city has a holiday ornament that's also online. That's $17. It is a very special ornament. It was designed by Sarah Godinez, who works in our city clerk's office. At the dais tonight is a special gift from the city, a backpack, Monrovia backpack. So we'd like to give that to you and thank you for all your hard work over the year. There will be a lot more work to do next year.
Speaking of which, could we get an update on timing for the large development projects that have been
Yes.
put in applications?
Absolutely. John Mayer and our city attorney's office have been deep in looking at a draft environmental document. I anticipate early next year that will be released for public review and brought before the commission. And that project is for 701 South Myrtle Avenue. There has been some delay with the Oak Park project, but 701 is currently moving forward.
Commissioner Brown?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the inclusionary housing study session. So I listened in on the last one. What are they what's going to be covered? I thought it was pretty comprehensive. What are they going to be discussing?
So the purpose of the second housing or study session, the council directed staff to look back and bring a concept draft ordinance to narrow in recommendations on the triggers for implementation, exemptions to implementation. So those types of thresholds where a project would be applicable to the ordinance.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Scheffler.
Happy holidays, everybody here.
Yes, thank you. So thank you for your report, Director Bermejo. Next item on our agenda, reports or announcements from commissioners. I had one thing that I wanted to ask about and I wanted to discuss with the commission. Recently, the In-N-Out construction has begun on Huntington Drive, and a lot of or most of the mature trees on that lot were destroyed. That made me consider, at least, Monrovia as a Tree City USA, and our reputation of having a healthy and plentiful tree canopy. And I wondered if it would be appropriate to either ask the city manager or the city council if it made sense to pursue options for enhanced protection or other things that we could do to better guarantee the health of our tree canopy here in the city. So I'm not sure exactly if the majority of the commission feels it would be appropriate to ask that. I don't know how exactly to ask about this, but
Let me digress.
Sorry,
Okay.
let me just,
Yes.
Chair, before we move forward, I just want to
Yes.
say that we can't have a discussion about it tonight because it's not on tonight's agenda.
Fair.
So that would be a violation of the Brown Act.
okay.
But what we can do is either you as chair or a majority of the commission can direct staff to place on a future agenda at a planning commission meeting an item to have a discussion regarding this issue.
Okay. Yes, I would like to do that. Can I take a vote and see if the rest of the commission concurs with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Would that be appropriate?
Yeah, that's appropriate.
Okay. Then let me just take a roll call then.
Go ahead, and I have a follow-up to that. Go ahead with yours.
Okay, let me just take a roll call and ask who is interested in placing that future agenda item on the agenda. Okay,
Yeah.
yes, okay. Is anyone opposed? Okay,
Seven.
no one is opposed. So we'll place that item on a future agenda.
For that item, would it be appropriate for staff to kind of go over the existing standards, for example, to maybe start the conversation?
Yeah, I would like some, or I think it would be appropriate for us to consider context, what exists,
Perfect.
and options, everything from, well, you can come up with
Okay.
the options.
Will do. Thank you.
So speaking of.
Commissioner Austin.
Speaking of the In-N-Out Burger, I don't recall, it's been a while since it's taken a while, when they came through the planning commission, what the tree retention plan was, and maybe they were allowed, if maybe staff could report back or agendize that the next meeting, because it might have been within there. We might not have caught it, or they're putting the really good shade tree known as palm trees everywhere over there.
Yeah,
But it would be, maybe that we allowed it, maybe we didn't allow it, and if so, we didn't allow it, we can bring their permit back to us.
So, yeah, not to get into a discussion about this, but it is my understanding that everything that they've done has been within the approved permit, which is exactly what touched off my desire to consider if the contents of those permits were appropriate for the future.
Chair, can I make a comment? And I'm not sure, how much can I talk about this subject right now? That's just.
I think it would be best to save it
save
for the discussion at the next
Okay.
planning commission
Okay, that's
meeting.
fine. Thank you.
Sounds like it's going to be a good discussion. I'm glad we got it on the agenda for the future. Okay, any other topics or reports or announcements before we move on? Okay, I just wanted to say thank you very much to city staff, to Councilmember Belden, and to everyone for a great year. I think we're all looking forward to a break over the holidays. I hope we all get to take some time. So happy holidays and happy new year. And I look forward to seeing you all in January. I believe our next scheduled meeting is January 15th. So with that, this meeting is now adjourned at 8:43.